We appreciate everybody's patience as we continue to work towards getting a budget put together. Much gets made of the differences. People sometimes forget that there's an awful lot of commonality between the two versions of the budget. Department of Health is fully funded. We funded for wildland fires. We funded a full ECA for the schools, full ECA for the child development centers. Community college is fully funded. So there's a lot of commonality. The spread between the two budgets is about 10%. And it's still a big number. And we're going to endeavor to get that taken care of. And Mr. Co-Chair, your folks were good enough to lay 8 proposals on the table the last time we met. We promised you a response to those. And then we have 8 proposals ourselves to put on the table. And so, per your desire, we will start with not the identicals and the languages, but we'll start with your 8 proposals and the counter proposals that we have where we in fact do have a counter proposal. So let me find that, and then let me find my notes where I describe what these are. I need one document for this presentation. This is 93. Okay. The first proposal that the House had was with respect to capital construction. And they had a number of projects that were added back in. I'm not quite sure what the grand total was. I have 228 million here. And the Senate's position on the Senate side was that CapCon failed of introduction in both bodies, and that a budget bill is supposed to be for the ordinary expenses of government, and traditionally capital construction has been held not to be one of those. But we do recognize that the House went ahead and amended CapCon back into the bill, and notwithstanding our reservations about the constitutionality, to get a deal done in the spirit of cooperation, we're going to go ahead and respond on the capital construction. So our proposal is as follows. Of the total capital construction proposed, the Senate is willing to go along with 106 million of that, 105,689,000, but wants to cut 123 million. The 105 is all in non-general funds, so it's federal funds or private funds or state parks, rec money, that kind of thing. We did agree to some S13 for planning and that sort of thing. And then the 123 million is all either general fund or SIPA. So with that, what we're prepared to agree to is 55.8 million federal funds for the Guernsey entryway. That's a 4.8 million. And then the F.E. Warren Power situation, 51 million federal funds. Then there's 33,340 million in private funds for the Gillette Community College District NZ Center. It's an authorization for them to accept title and for them to expend private funding. That is agreed to. The one proviso, however, is as presented in the budget by the House, it places those buildings on major maintenance. Now, I'll talk about this, but it gets a little bit awkward for me because I clearly have a dog in the hunt, but I have Senate colleagues who said at the time of the creation of GCC, they recall it being said that there would not be any state funds expended. And so they objected to placing the buildings on major maintenance. So this is accepting those, to authorizing those transfers, but without the footnote of the House that says they'll be placed on the state's major maintenance. Next is 7.31 million special revenue. State parks, outdoor rec, 6.6 million. State parks, territorial prison, 210,000. State Parks Water Facility, $300,000. State Parks Quebec, $25,000. Then $9.4 million in S13 to maintain a contingency of $17 million. They've got projects underway. And then for enterprise studies, level 1 and level 2, you know, you've got to keep that studying, the planning going. And then the reversion of Jackson Outreach Center unused funds and reappropriation of $1 million to finish that project. And then the creation of a new section 330 for the Gillette Property Transfer 1. There's no money associated with that. It authorized them to accept title from the county and the city. And again, that footnote that they would, striking the House provision that they would be included on state major maintenance, which we're told is at a rough estimate about $2.5 million per biennium. Next, cut from the capital construction, $123 million, $54,120,000 of S13 for the Riverton office building renovation, $8 million. I would note that the section 331 remains intact, which provides $2.5 million for the Riverton office building, so progress can continue there. 2, the DFS Boys School Maintenance Storage, $1.59 million. 3, rebuilding of the Helibase Complex, $7.5 million. And then Stolt Hall, $37 million. And then cut $69 million general fund for the Wyoming Department of Health Veterans Home. So that is, I can't remember what the aggregate total of what was proposed by the House, but there is some compromise there. We did agree to go along with some of that CapCon, a significant portion of that CapCon, but not all of it. Do you want me to stop there or just keep going through all the 8 proposals? Okay, questions? Representative Larson.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, on a sheet I see that there's I believe it's a deletion of the Wyoming State Hospital demolition account, which is just authority to use the funds that were appropriated last year.
Let me see, did I miss that?
And if I'm reading that right, just curious as to the rationale behind that.
I don't know that that's not in this one, is it? It is. And I think the rationale is when we get to the footnotes, the Senate intends to agree to the House language that says 2-year moratorium on the demolition of the state hospital. So there doesn't seem reason
Different animal. Different animal, not the same.
Okay, well, tell me about the 2 animals.
So the appropriation we made last year, which this in CapCon authorizes, is to approve, turn down 2 buildings and building a pre-engineered building.
Say that again, what kind of building?
Metal building.
Oh, 2 metal buildings, okay.
No, a metal building destroys 2. Now, further down, the other amendment is stating of the phase 1 demolition project, there will be 4 buildings and some tunnels that will not be demoed as planned. So it's just a moratorium on 4 of the 9 or 10 total buildings. Then further down, you reject 13 million in there that comes from the 21-22. That's appropriated in the budget bill. This just authorizes them to use it when that time is appropriate. So I'm trying to make the connection on all of that because they're not all the same. They have the same thing to do with the demolition project that we've been planning now with Department of Construction for about 5 years.
Okay. Let me say this, Representative Larson. Afterwards, I'll get with staff. They can walk me through those things, the various parts of the bill. And if there's some part of that demolition that's ready to go, then we'll agree to put that funding back.
So just for clarification, Don, are we reading this right, or just if you know?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, the House position appropriated up to 3.4, I'm going to round, $million authorized, no new money. This was from last year. Because last year's language was limited only to demolition. And the testimony was that not only are they going to demolish 2 storage buildings, but they needed to build a metal building, temporary essentially, for the other work that was going on in the facility. And this language that the House adopted allows them to do that.
And so what was deleted on the Senate amendment?
I believe would delete section 330, which is the allowance of the expenditure of $3.4 million for demolition of 2 storage buildings and replacement of a storage building.
Okay.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. Other questions about CapCon? Thank you, Representative Larson. Appreciate it.
Okay, go ahead.
We'll work with you on that one. Okay, that's construction. Next is education, construction. I'll turn it over to Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, the Senate position on the school CapCon is we're going to wait. We want to wait until the Mercer studies are done. Right now, they're being conducted as we speak. That'll help us get a prioritization schedule put together and probably keep us out of trouble. We also would like to put $55 million into an account for projects that are ongoing and to help everything out. And with that, I stand for questions.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little clarification. You say 55 million for projects ongoing. I guess I don't understand what projects are ongoing that you're referencing. If you could be a little more clear on that, that would be great.
I probably misspoke. I should have said new projects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we wanted to note that last year we appropriated $100 million, $5 million for Mercer studies, which are ongoing, 95 for construction. That 95 remains. It's still in the bill. And this would add another 55 million to it, so that as the commission works through that priority list and they're ready to go, whether it be component level or construction, that the monies are there to swing into action. We want to keep moving through that list and do the right thing for the schools that need to be taken care of.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, for Senator McEwen, so if I understand it correctly, this would mean that although an additional $55 million would be set aside, there would not actually be any new schools constructed in 2024. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Not until we get the Mercer studies back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, so Representative Stith, if those Mercer studies come back and the first 100 million is available for authorization, it's ready to go. That first 100 million is earmarked for construction. So if they get the priority list done and the Mercer's done, that first 100 million, the second 55 million, we do have a note that it would be upon further legislative authorization for that second tranche of 55 million.
But, Mr. Chairman, just
But
to
hopefully there would be some schools built in 2024.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, then, under the Senate version of this, who decides if a school gets built or not? That is it going to be the School Facilities Commission that just says, hey, here's our Mercer study, it's done, so green light to an elementary school in Laramie County and just gets built without any further legislative authorization? Or do you require us to come back next year and authorize that specific school to be built? Who's making the decision? That's my question.
Well, I believe this body, the Wyoming legislature, subsequent to the Campbell decisions, passed laws that said there would be prioritization based on conditioning capacity, based on objective studies, and a priority list prepared. And that's pursuant to this body, pursuant to Supreme Court edict. And so that the commission, following the rules that we've laid out, would outline which schools would get built. That's the way the rules are written. we wrote the rules.
So, Mr. Chairman, just so I get a clear answer on
Yes.
that, then the School Facilities Commission could just make the decision and say, we're going to build this elementary school in Laramie County, and that's our decision, and that's the final decision. Is
Correct.
that how this reads?
Correct.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said on the 55 million that it would still come back for legislative approval. So I guess to me, that you would still be able to come back to the legislature just as we do today, and the legislature could impart our will on that 55 million and change the list again, no different than what is occurring today. So I'm trying to understand how you see this as a different process than what was used to get to what's before us today.
Well, last year we went through this where we were calling out specific schools and they were out of priority. And we were in litigation then as we're in litigation now. And upon advice, those specific schools were taken off and we deferred to the list in the commission in the statutory process. So what we're proposing is the same thing, that we don't go out and start building schools based on a political body determining what the list is if it's out of priority for what the statute has required subsequent to the Supreme Court decisions. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, it really doesn't, isn't it?
Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It comes back to if the legislature is involved, the legislature will have the opportunity to suggest how we feel the list ought to be. And so if your desire is it for the commission to have sole control so that the legislature can't use, as you say, the political body to decide any of this, then the language should be removed that says for further legislative action. Because as soon as you involve the legislature, there is the opportunity for all of us, all 93 of us, to offer to put a school where we'd like to put a school, whether it's high on the list or low on the list. And so the process that was used to get us the list for this year that is included in the JAC bill is essentially what you're offering here, lesser dollar value, but it's the same. We're going to end up in the same position based on the language you've proposed, is the way I read it. So I'm trying to understand how you feel that's different.
So this amendment would revert to the list as it came from the commission before the legislative select committee or the governor or whoever started moving schools up out of priority order. So it would revert to what the commission had forwarded to us in priority order. This very specifically says, based on facility condition and capacity needs assessments in priority order listed by the commission, which is exactly what we did last year. And so I'll give you an analogy. The reason that Game and Fish is independent because they don't want the politicians deciding who gets how many elk licenses. Highway Department is independent because legislature evidently used to cut itself up deciding who was going to get a road built and who wasn't. So we've delegated that to the Highway Department. It's the same thing here. We've delegated that in an objective process to this commission. And it's the position of the Senate that when we take a high school that's number 52 in priority and move it to the top of the list, you've just jilted 51 other school districts, which is contrary to the rulings of the Supreme Court, which demanded equal treatment for all. So we want to go back to where politicians are not picking and choosing who comes ahead on the list. It's just, it's not good politically, it's not good legally. That's our position. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So setting aside maybe our differences on the list, I'm curious on the approximately 40% reduction that's been made to the allocation and the Senate's opinion on whether or not that puts us in litigation territory. Thank you.
Well, currently there's $100 million unspent. The Mercer studies are underway. So, and I'm not a real lawyer, I just do wills, but my argument would be we funded more schools, put another 55 million on there, based on what I think I've heard from the commission. As those Mercer studies come online, you're probably looking at the latter end of the year before you could seriously get into some construction, but you could certainly undertake the design for those that are listed for component level or replacement. So could they, in theory, go through that 95 million this year? Perhaps. And so this, this is a sign of good faith that we're willing to continue to fund construction of schools. So I think legally it helps us.
Okay, please proceed.
Let me see what those are. These are the Senate amendments with respect to the optional 1 cent, or excuse me, with the optional severance tax. That has an implication of about $108 million. I can't remember where the bringer, the sponsor, redirected that funding to. And then a change to the spending policy, reducing it from 5% of the PMTF balance to 4.5%. That has implications for about $190 million, reduced opportunity for spending. And then the bringer of the amendment simplified our chart of accounts by eliminating SIPA and putting all that money, both the assets and the liabilities, into the general fund. That's a shift of about $175 million, but it simplifies things. And then eliminated the LSAR backstop that used to be for the school capital construction account, and now it is, I believe it's for the school SIPA. And so the idea here, Mr. Chair, as we discussed the other day, is that you and Senator Hicks and the House and the Senate worked hard, CapFin, to come up with this what's so-called 5X, 7X policy that we're going to have in reserves for the schools and for the state 5 times the spend, and with an idea of 7 times the spend, so that money could be better invested, and it gives us some real margin. And as I shared with you, I've always had reservation about that much money being in a reserve account where it could be grabbed onto, but we're well on the way. And so many of these Rube Goldberg accounting, and it's just, the idea is let's just get it simplified now that we've got those backstops in place. So we're going to stand tight on the Senate position on this one. Representative Larson.
Thank you. So I heard in our last conversation on the school construction that there was a concern that we were going contrary to what we had passed by law. And then here we've got OPSTA in the back, in the SIPA and the spending policy, which is in the green books, that we're now throwing that aside. And so that's one, I'd like to understand that a little more. And then on the SIPA side, so you take SIPA this year, and then all the obligations of SIPA that is currently in motion and in play, some of these projects that are out 2 or 3 years, and you're still spending money on these construction projects, and now we're moving that all into another accounting system, and then in 2 years, we're going to move it back. That seems to go contrary to efficiency and transparency. I'm not quite tracking why we want to move it out, and then in 2 years, it goes back.
Well, with respect to the green books, in the ideal world, if I had my way, we'd be completely prohibited from opening up the green books, but there's enough of that going around for both sides. I mean, I've seen the House open up the green books in a 2-year budget bill. I've seen the Senate open up the green books in a 2-year budget bill, and that's just the way the game's played, sort of like putting CapCon back into the budget bill. So that's the reality of it. Efficiency, I'll try to speak for the bringer of the amendment, but he's much more articulated on these things. He feels very strongly about getting moving on getting these things simplified. I think we have another session coming up, and I think hope springs eternal in the human breast. I think he's hopeful that in a general session, we may bring this into the green books and make that change permanent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything further on that one?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I will, let's see. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Senate wishes to adopt, to keep our position, which is dealing to keep the Senate position to transfer UW to a standard budgeting. I think we had this discussion a couple days ago, but I know that in the Senate, the discussion was on possible efficiency to that, as well as greater oversight. But the Senate position is to stay with our position with UW going to the standard budgeting. It's pretty straightforward. And I'll stand for any questions you have.
Anything? Okay, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have is motion CC is to adopt the Senate position on items 70 and 71. So 70 is on gender studies. What the amendment does is shall not expend monies for gender studies at the university. And I mean, this has turned into more than just gender studies. It's turned into gender identity, transgenderism, studies on sexuality, things that come way outside the scope of what gender studies used to be. And also we have on 71, with a decrease in spending, $1,730,854 from the general funds. And basically not to be spent on Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. There was some discussion about grant money, but from what I've gathered, there is more grant money coming from private industry that has dried up. There's been several lawsuits that have happened. This money's just drying up. I have a family member that went to UW, and I hate to use this word in front of the committee, but she was brainwashed into things that her family never taught her, and they didn't believe. She ended up leaving this state as a DEI officer. 2 months, that was probably about 2 months ago, moved to another state back east, and ironically, that program has been shut down. So they're moving her to another part of the college, but this is the trend that's happening already. We have a student that we sent out of here equipped for DI, and they went to a job that's actually, the rug's been pulled out from underneath of them. So I don't think this is something that Wyoming as a state, this isn't something we should be doing as far as when you start looking at the companies. There's a list of corporations that are already dropping this like a hot potato because it's not good for them. We shouldn't make this a center point of our schools. So at that, I'll stand for any questions.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Representative Bouchard, or Senator Bouchard. Does it not seem reasonable, rather to control that with the purse strings, is to develop a policy and come forth with a bill like we do on other things with University of Wyoming when we establish what our intent for them to do is? I'm just curious why we would want to do it in this fashion rather than through a bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, this is a budget expenditure. and it's really simple. There's not even enough here to write a bill for. We could certainly come back with a bill next year to expand that, but I mean, I think this is as simple as the expenditure. I think it's a good thing for a university to start moving in a different direction on this issue. We have parents that probably don't send their kids to schools that are keeping these issues. I would say that if we move forward here, we're going to put UW in a better position for students to come to Wyoming.
Mr. Representative Larson, yes,
Perhaps
please.
I'm misunderstanding. What is it that, when you say that we can't use any of these funds, appropriated funds, in these two areas, that's not a simple reduction. That's an elimination, isn't it?
Mr. Chairman
Yeah,
and
Senator Bouchard.
Representative Larson, I mean, of course it is. That's what a lot of these amendments are, these motions. That's what we're doing. We're going to cut money. And it's not valid that we should still, this is money that the taxpayers are paying, right? This is taxpayers' money that goes into the system and brought across the board on both sides of the aisle. When it comes to the transgender issue that's being pushed, I get just as many emails from people on both sides of the aisle on that issue. So we are going down into issues that we are teaching kids, young people, students. Is that where our education belongs, doing that?
Representative Larson, let me see if I can help out a little bit. Your original question was, shouldn't this be in the form of a bill? And I guess my answer is the same as when you talked about why reopen the green books in the budget bill. There's plenty of that to go around. I mean, there's a number of Senate and House amendments that really should be in a bill. Look like they're standing up a new program, or they're comprehensive enough that they should be in a bill, or somewhere the bill failed, and so now here we see the bill in the budget. So, there's plenty of that to go around as well. And in the ideal world, that's not the way it would operate, but this is the system we have. Further questions before we move on to the next topic? Okay. Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I bring you motion DD. We discussed this quite a bit with the committee here. It deals with the enterprise inflation. We tried to come up with some numbers and kind of discussed them with downstairs, and couldn't come up with the exact numbers, so we're just proposing to cut everything in half, and we'll come back next year and we'll discuss it and see if they need another half.
Okay. Question, Senator Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, so on that last comment about coming back next year, is part of your proposal to have this entire amount, I guess, available July 1, and then if they were burning through it, to have the difference, the remainder in a supplemental budget? Is that the suggestion?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's what our group decided. Yeah, if the agencies come back and discuss this with the governor and say they're short of funds, then we'll bring it in the supplemental.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a question on that from a timing standpoint. The budget goes into effect July 1. The agencies need to submit their supplemental budget to the governor by September 1 of this year. So they'll really only have 2 months of experience. The governor will submit to the legislature by the 1st of December, essentially. So now we're really only not even 6 months of experience to know how much extra they will need. And then by the 1st of March or so in 2025, we'll be passing a supplemental budget. So we will not have experienced 12 months of the biennium to even know what the new amount might be. So Senator Larson, I guess I'm trying to understand how we're supposed to get a good judge by this delay, other than the estimate that they've already provided us.
Well, I've worked with Representative Larson trying to get answers, and we had about as little success as we did during the Appropriations Committee process. And I would expect that given the way that inflation was presented to the Joint Appropriations Committee, I wouldn't be surprised if the Budget Office is working on their revised figures and is ready to come into the supplemental with something that is as clear as a bell, clearly explains what's needed, as opposed to what we're operating from now, which is kind of an estimate the JAC came up with for the biennium. And the feeling of the group was, let's cut it in half and we'll find out at supplemental budget time how much more is needed, get a clear, more concise explanation, and perhaps significantly more than what's here in this budget. So I'd be shocked if they don't have something in the works right now, given what a confusion of data we went through on appropriations, and we're still working through.
That's, Mr. Chairman, that sounds a bit.
Representative Larson.
Sounds a bit speculative, though, in your assumption of what the Budget Department is doing, and to give us comfort that they're well on the track of doing that. I mean, have you had conversations with the Budget Department that makes you feel like that's where they're headed?
Representative Larson, no, human nature, if I were the Budget Department, I would have the thing done well before the July 1 kickoff of the budget submissions. I'd have it well documented and ready to go. And if not me, somebody in my department would be charged with it. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, the next one is mine. This relates to the additional positions. There was a net, and I know the numbers, people get different numbers, but we had net 77 new FTEs. And the bringer of this amendment on the Senate floor, the position originally was that of those, they wanted to eliminate 42. And the note said, eliminate the 42 new, Governor, or go out and find some vacancies for an equivalent amount of money. Now, what we've heard from you all and Co-Chair Nicholas is you really want some of those positions, specific positions filled. Some of those positions the governor did not recommend, and Joint Appropriations has a very strong determination that some of those are going to be filled. For instance, the DEQ positions. And I know I am responsible for two of those, which is in the Department of Health or Family Services for two people to help with the profoundly deaf children in the school system. So now what it is it's structured this way. Of the executive branch vacant positions as of June 30, 2024, and your new positions come into effect July 1, the governor shall identify 42 full-time positions that if eliminated or unfilled. So this exempts the positions the JAC has identified as they want to be added. Those are exempted from this. The governor is not to take those positions. He's defined 42, which if eliminated or unfilled would generate not less than $3.7 million of annual savings and so forth. So I'm hoping that accommodates the desire of the House conferees to make sure that the positions you identified as you wanted to be hired are those hired, but it still accommodates the Senate desire to not have a net increase in the FTEs out of vacancies.
Okay, please proceed.
By golly, I forgot who was in charge of this particular one.
I think I was, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
Senator Larson.
I'm bringing motion FF. Deals with the Border Control and where their funding comes from, and also Administration and Interstate Streams Division. Currently in the budget, it's in Water One, and with the Senate amendment, it put it all in general funds. We've had this battle for a long, long time. Border Control is in the Constitution. We ought to fund it from general fund is what our opinion is. Water One was set up to develop water and for water uses, so, and planning. So that's our amendment,
Well, it's only appropriate that you bring that motion.
our position, I mean.
Okay, okay, next.
Next is, that's mine. This is, and I apologize, we've got a blank line on the dollars. Because we're trying to work to find a number that would allow some reversion of this funding, but still allow the program to go on, continue. And so what's important is we wanted to bring to the table, the sponsor of the amendment is struggling to get a number in conjunction with the governor's office. But the concept is we are willing to move in terms of not reverting absolutely everything that's unobligated. We want to take a look at what's unobligated, what's in process, leave a little bit of room there, but still revert some of that funding on section 321 and 325. So you'll see blank placeholders. On 325, the 24 million that for clean water and drinking water, that is restored, so anything that gets reverted will not impact that $24 million transfer. And so then we just got placeholders of the original 75 million, how much would be reverted. And then there's also, if of the deployment of funds, award of funds during the, before the next legislature, there must be some demonstrated need that it could not await the legislative appropriation process. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions? So
Yeah, the important thing is we're willing to move. We're willing to move.
what I don't quite understand is because you have the 200 million go back, right?
Correct.
So, Don, how many dollars are available? And the 24 stays for the water project. So how much, based upon our actions so far, how much money is available where they can possibly move on?
So for the infrastructure, you appropriated 75. They have awarded 7, and you have carved out an additional 24. That leaves you 44 million that is unallocated.
Yeah, same question on 321.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, the legislature has appropriated 150 million. They have awarded projects totaling 59 million. They also, you have carved out an additional 30 million for specific purposes, SER, capital improvements and the like. If you consider that $30 million, that would leave 61 million available. If you don't consider those 3 carve-outs, that would leave 91 million available.
Okay, any other questions about that? Go ahead.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. And then we had approximately 75 million that was come out of that mix to go to the University of Wyoming for a particular project. I think we moved it out of 327 and 325. Where does that show up in here? Is that why we only have 44 million left in 325?
Mr.
Please,
Chairman.
please.
Representative Larson, so the UW Research 75 million is not part of these 3 sections. That is still left. The Senate's position is to eliminate that. The House position is to retain that.
Thank you, Don.
So my recollection is that was contained in a section 327 that JAC eliminated. It had $80 million originally. It was to backstop 321 and 325. JAC took the 75 million towards the Thermo Fisher deal, and that's still in the House position. And 5 million went to, I can't recall, but that wiped out the 327 funding.
Right.
And so when the Senate defeated Thermo Fisher, I think they reverted the 75 million to LISRA. And where did the 5 million go, Don, out of section 327?
Mr. Chairman, that's in section 318, which amends Section 321. So it's part of that regular energy matching.
Yeah.
So that 5 million went back into 321?
Mr. Chairman,
That's on the House side. Okay, so is that added to the 150 million, or that's in the 150 million?
Mr. Chairman, that would be originally as part of that 150 million would go to 155 million. In the Senate position, you just have that reverting back to the general fund.
Okay, thank you. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little more clarity. You say add language to section 321, 323, 325, that there has to be an imminent and demonstrated need. For what purpose? I guess it just seems like language hanging out there without a tie to anything else. So a little more clarification, if you would, please.
Well, thank you, Representative. It may not be the most artful, and I'm certainly open to suggestion. I don't have any pride of authorship there. The idea is, in the ordinary course of events, if you're going to spend money in $100 million increments, you'd come to the legislature and you would have an appropriation, and you would describe the project, and we would thoroughly vet it in Joint Appropriations Committee. That's not the case here. So the feeling on the Senate side is, if that oversight has been abandoned, then there should be a finding that we couldn't wait for legislative session. This opportunity for this grant was so imminent that if we waited, we would have lost it. That's all that says. Essentially, it's saying, if you can wait for appropriation session, for the next budget session, to move that project forward, please do so. Otherwise, demonstrate that there was a reason you couldn't wait for the next legislative session to put it in a bill. We're back to that whole discussion about, is this a subject for a bill? I trust that answers the question for you. Help clarify that a little bit, Representative Walters.
It does partially, but then I'll take it a bit farther and say the way I read the remainder of the motion is you're sweeping all of the funds, but you're being courteous to the ones that may be obligated to make sure we're not pulling out the rug out from under anybody. So for example, the 200 million for the large projects, or roughly 61 million is what we just heard in section 321, maybe a potential reversion. All of that would be gone. So if the money isn't there, I don't know how there would be an opportunity to prove that there's an imminent and demonstrated need, because they wouldn't have funds to spend in an imminent or demonstrated area. So that's where I'm tying the two together. That's where I start to lose the disconnect, start to become disconnected.
So to clarify, I think my opener was, we are willing to compromise and leave some of that money on the table. So the programs would continue. They're not going to, we're willing to compromise, and saying we're willing to not revert all of it. It's just, we're trying to get some clarity in terms of the numbers. So right now there's 61 million or 91 million remaining in 321. 44 million in 325, and it's a question of somewhere between 0 and 44 million gets reverted, and somewhere between 0 and 44 million remains. Thank you. So, Mr. Co-Chair, I think the important thing that we wanted to convey is we're willing to move. Significant movement on the capital construction, significant movement on the schools. May not agree in all the particulars, but there's movement. Movement on inflation, movement on the vacancies. I think that we offered a fair compromise on the vacancies, and then willingness to move on the large energy and the IIJA as well.
So you want to go to Senate number 8 then?
Certainly.
Proposal number 8, set 4.
So the Senate then, we've got to close the spending gap between us. From the original JAC bill, I have the House added 362 million and the Senate cut 767 million, a mix of ongoing and one-time spending. There were numerous House amendments, some adding more, some adding less money. It'd take quite a bit of time to go through those, and we will at some point, but just to get the conversation started, what we wanted to lay up on the table, we found that 8 of those, coinciding with your 8, amounts to 344 million of the $362 million gap. So these are the 8 largest increases in spending contained in the in the House version. So I'll start off, and we're taking them in, you'll see item 98. We're taking them in order on this spreadsheet. So item 98 correlates to line 98 in the spreadsheet. So this first, I'll turn it over to Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're basically back to the same thought process with the schools. Until the Mercer studies are done and we've really developed a priority list and a need, I don't think we need to open up an account and just put money in it. So the Senate position is to just pull that all out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
$200 million. It's $200 million that's created for a large school capital construction holding account.
So if you pull that out, what happens to the 200 million? Does it go to the Senate amendment? Don, I believe that would make sense.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, it would, and it would remain in the school foundation program.
Thanks for that clarification. My apologies for not having gotten that in there, Mr. Co-Chair. Okay, the next is, that one is on me. That's item 99. The House added. Oh, is that Dan? I can't read my own handwriting. All right, it's you. Go ahead. Dan looks like Dave to me.
Thanks,
Go ahead, Representative
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Larson.
I bring you motion aye. We're staying with the Senate position. Delete 20 million general funds from the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Endowment Fund. Currently, there's 30 million in there, and Senate position is we don't need to add any more.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Senator Bouchard.
Item number 102, Senate position is to delete section 300K. There's $10 million general fund going to a newly created Wyoming State Museum construction account. With the Senate position is we can come back, write a bill, put that in a bill, and let's all vote on it instead of just sticking this in an amendment. And it'd be a much better project if we do it as a bill. And there's $10 million that we just don't need to spend right now. So that's our position. Stand for any questions.
And I know there's some who have a dream of a $143 million new state museum. And if that bill legislation passes, we would fund it at that time. There's no need to create yet another account set aside for it as our position. Okay, Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is motion KK. Delete the House position of 40 million in the new 330 for the 988 suicide prevention line. Right now.
Trust fund.
Trust fund. That's fully funded through 2026. So I think we should look at this in a couple of years, see how successful it's been and what the funding should look like. I think that's about it, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to tag on to that and emphasize the difference between the trust fund and the ongoing funding. It's always been, at least my position personally, I know a number of people in the Senate, perhaps the House as well, that we want that suicide hotline. We want it to be well-funded. Doesn't mean you have to create a trust fund. It's interesting because we get these special funds created for all different kinds of causes. They're intended to throw off income that then our feeling is that this legislature appropriates from biennium to biennium. And in fact, operations, let's see, this was created, the 988 formally created in 2023. At that time, it relied on ARPA funding for $2.1 million. And then the current budget in Wyoming Department of Health has $1,960,000, an appropriation of $227,000 for managers and 1.7 for operations. So it's fully funded through the next 2 years of the biennium. it's our position there's no need to create a $40 million trust fund. Representative Larson.
Thank you, and we certainly is a difference there between having it in the standard budget and the intent in the House's position, and what we've always considered is as if you had a trust fund that was generating enough revenue that would fund the biennial operations of the suicide hotline, that would insulate it from the up and down budget cuts like we've seen recently in 2021, when we had the step 2 and step 3, and we cut $100 million out of the Department of Health. It would be insulated from that. Did you guys have any similar conversation about that when you had this conversation?
Representative Larson, it's our feeling that the ups and downs, the vicissitudes, the fortunes of the state of Wyoming, it impacts us all. There's lots of programs that are very worthy that we'd like to insulate from the ups and downs and the buffeting of the economy. I know you've been an advocate for a large number of programs in the Department of Health, Department of Family Services. Why wouldn't all of those merit a trust fund? It's our position that the legislature, as appropriators, looks at every program from biennium to biennium and funds them. And this one is no different.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Stiff, yes.
Just a comment, of course, just a comment on the Suicide Prevention Hotline Trust Fund funding, something for the Senate side to consider. It's been a nationwide phenomenon that for the 988 hotline, as it's been implemented, that across the nation there have been, say last year, there were over 1 million people who called the hotline who got put on hold, okay? And because of the underfunding of the hotline nationwide. I don't have numbers specific to Wyoming, but this problem of getting put on hold has been such a problem that they've actually done studies and tried to find the optimal music to play while the person is on hold to try to keep them online. But as many as 10% of the people who call in drop off because they've been put on hold. And so that's why if we have it as a trust fund and we also keep the Department of Health as we have in our implementing legislation using best practices, we could avoid that being a problem in Wyoming as it's been in the rest of the country.
Well, having lost a family member who was very near and dear to me to suicide, I absolutely understand the problem. I believe it should be fully and properly funded as it is in the budget. Entirely different question from a trust fund in our view. We support full funding for the 988 suicide hotline. Absolutely support it. Absolutely, with every fiber of our being. Just differ on the creation of trust funds. That's all it is. Okay? Anything else? Okay, the next one is mine, which is the House added $25 million for IIJA BEAD grants. So this is the Inflation Infrastructure Jobs Act, and then BEAD is something about equity for access to the internet grants. And this was this $25 million one, we've already got the IIJA funding in another part of the bill, but in particular, this is substituting state funding for what should be a private match. The last round of funding, of course, can't find my document when I need it. The last round of funding on this, the last two rounds, the matches were all made by private industry. Here it is. It's here we have. There's a project in Powell. It was 1.9 million. The applicant provided 10%, 195,000. The applicant being a private phone company. Here's another one. It was a 6.4 million. The applicant matched that 3.9 million. This is in Gillette. Private company provided that match. So both rounds of prior funding, it's been the companies that benefit from this that have been providing the match. And here we are, the the government's going to kick in 24 million to do the match. And it's our feeling that those prior funds were deployed successfully with private industry participation. Why put 24 million of state funds on the line? Stand for questions. Okay. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So again, the Senate position is to delete the position of the House, which is to reduce the 13 million for the demolition account. And the reason on the Senate side was that there was, I think, a general understanding at one point that we were going to have a 2-year moratorium on this particular item. And considering that this was not an immediate need, considering the other needs of the state budget. So again, pretty straightforward. That's the Senate position.
Okay. And Senator Salazar, the next one, please.
The Senate position on employee compensation, Phase 3 was not to fund that. The Senate position was that we had funded Phase 1 and Phase 2 over a 24-month period, which I think was almost at 18%. And the general feeling of the Senate was to give these two phases a chance to work before we went to Phase 3, which was 18 million. There was not, the majority of the Senate believed that holding off on Phase 3 before we actually see the ramifications of the first two phases was to wait on it, so.
And I'd add on to that I can recall during the joint appropriations process, we heard from some of the agencies where they'd had this long list of openings. DEQ was one where he had a series of openings, and he was beginning to backfill. He was beginning to fill that up, that list. So it was felt that we should wait on that. I would also note parenthetically that there remains in the Senate budget the 5.9 million to get the vacancies up to. I think it's 90% of MPP, so it's important that that piece of it does get completed. Okay? And then Dan Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Vice Chairman. This one brings motion 00, deletes a House position on item 127, which eliminates $18.5 million to address mental health needs of students. We are feeling this should be a bill. It was a bill, and it didn't make it this year, so we think it should be brought back.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, the Sheridan High math, I come up with a grand total of $344.5 million. These are just the 8 largest. There were another 2.5 pages of amendments for various sorts of add-ons came out of the House, some ranging from $1 million to $100,000 to $500,000.
So, Mr. Co-Chair?
And yes, sir.
I'm just going to interrupt you a second. We need to run to the House floor and take a vote. So this is probably a good place to stop. And when we come back, and then we'll meet before we come back. So, so we'll just stand in recess for about 15 minutes.
Okay.
And we'll get back.
Stand in recess. When you come back, do you want to go ahead and vote on these things, get them off the table? Okay. Okay, we are back at Joint Conference Committee. Mr. Co-Chair, I'd just like to volunteer two things. In that 8, with respect to Senator Larson's concern that it was spending authority on the $13 million for the hospital demolition, we would, rather than delete the House position, we would agree with the House position on that item. It's spending authority for 13 million of reversions that are contained in Section 308, which remains a part of the bill. So we would agree to the House position on that spending authority. And then I know there's a lot of things running around the CapCon bill, but let me find the CapCon bill. We would agree to the House position for the 3.4 million for the demolition and the metal building at the state hospital. We believe that to be under that moratorium. If it's not, that state hospital work needs to move forward. And Mr. Co-Chair, then, so we took the big stuff, and what remains is about 50 line items, some of which are identical and others of which are similar language. And there's 133 different line items that have to be processed at some point. So that's 40% of this spreadsheet. And I think I'm hoping that we can go ahead and work through the identicals and the language that's similar, come to some kind of concurrence on most of them. If for no other reason, it helps staff to get a start on drafting this thing. I'm confident we're going to get to a bill. And if they're able to start whatever they're able to knock off drafting wise, then helps the process move along. And I don't think it'll take us very long to consider those. What do you think of that?
So, Mr. Co-Chair, as we have sat, we've met, and we've gone through all of your report back to us. And I think we are unanimous in the concept that it is not reasonably practicable that we're going to come to agreement. We are now $900 million apart from a $1.1 billion difference. So we have barely scratched the surface of it. And so with that, I think it is the general consensus of this committee, of the House side, that we'll report back to the House and saying that we can't reach an agreement in this first committee, and request that the House appoint a second committee and assign a conference report to that effect.
Well, we've just started, Mr. Co-Chair. I don't think we're to that point at all. I've seen these negotiations go right up to the 11th hour. And
Mr. Co-Chair, I understand that, and I understand that position, but it doesn't look like there's any way that you're going to come even close to what this conference committee on House side is willing to negotiate.
we've barely begun these discussions, Mr. Co-Chair. I beg to differ. We've shown significant movement. We've shown significant willingness to continue to compromise on these items. And, there's a lot of extra spending on the House side. We've got to find a way to split that difference. And we haven't even gotten to those kind of discussions. We put on the table the 8 largest, which are responsible for about 90% of the spending over and above the Senate. And we're just getting started.
So, when our recommendations made to this committee, we were already below the Joint Conference Committee report, which your new committee has totally abandoned. And frankly, that's where we need to begin again.
So there is no Joint Conference Committee report. What do you mean you were below it?
Well, at the original Joint Appropriations Committee budget that was presented to the respective floors, when it came back from the floor of the House, ours was lower than that original Joint Conference Committee budget. Now you want to take another 100 or close to $900 million more than that budget. And we're just saying, we're not there. We're not going to.
I'm not following your math, Mr. Co-Chair, and I'm willing to sit down and try and understand what you're perspective is, but I don't think the process should be abandoned. I think we have to keep at it. We're very early on. These conference committees were just appointed. We've had 3 meetings, and I think to declare failure after 3 meetings is just premature.
Quite frankly, Mr. Co-Chair, the delay in this was because it took you 4 days to respond to something that we could have done in 6 hours or 4 hours. And what's the likelihood that we're going to get any further over the next 900 million? And we only have 2.5, 3 days left to really get anything done and then have the bill drafted and to have a resolution on both floors.
Well, we've got till Friday, and we have 3 legislative days that are unused. The clock's not yet run. I've seen these, Mr. Co-Chair, I've seen you dig in at the 11th hour, and there's no concessions until the very end. We're here, we're ready to bargain, we're ready to compromise, and we're ready to go. And I don't know that starting over again with another committee is going to change things. All right, well, I'm sorry you feel that way.